Good morning, everyone. I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Ms. Sara Pratt from actually headquarters at HUD. Ms. Pratt has been the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Enforcement and Programs at the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity since September of 2010. She oversees HUD's enforcement of the Fair Housing Act, Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and other civil rights laws, the Fair Housing Assistance Program, the Fair Housing Initiatives Program, and HUD's enforcement of the Section 3 of the Housing and Urban Development Act. As Director of the Enforcement at the HUD, as Director of Enforcement at HUD between 1993 and 1999, Ms. Pratt participated in a number of initiatives relating to discrimination in housing and lending. She has worked as an attorney, trainer, and fair housing and civil rights expert for 38 years. Please welcome Ms. Pratt.
Good morning and welcome to Kentucky. Oh no, wait. I'm the visitor, right? So what Chris didn't say, because he doesn't go back that long in Kentucky, is that I cut my teeth on fair housing here in Kentucky. The 38 years, I started when I was 6. I believe that. That's really good. It's early in the morning. I came to Kentucky and began working for the Kentucky Commission on Human Rights. I traveled the state working on civil rights and fair housing issues for a number of years. I spent a lot of time in the 80s working on desegregation of public housing authorities across the state. I was located in Louisville, so I was very engaged in and involved with efforts that my agency was making with respect to desegregation of Louisville schools and desegregation of Louisville's housing. I cut my teeth on civil rights in Kentucky, and I am very excited to be back with you today. I feel that my roots are here in Kentucky. I even feel that my reaction to springtime is familiar because of all those years in Louisville. I had the pleasure last fall of speaking at an event sponsored by the Metropolitan Housing Coalition in Louisville, and I met leadership from around the city of Louisville on a subject that I'm going to be discussing a little bit later on this morning about the work that's been going on in Louisville around fair housing. And after that, I met with some folks from the Kentucky Housing Corporation. It was one of the most inspirational conversations I've ever had. And you know, I travel the country. I give a lot of these speeches. I talk to a lot of people. I remember the discussion. I remember it in quite a bit of detail. And I was thrilled to be invited to come back and talk to you today. The work that we do in fair housing and civil rights, and the work we do in providing affordable housing across the Commonwealth and across the country, are, in my view, some of the most important work that we could possibly be doing today. We are, in my humble opinion, sort of at a threshold moment. We are now paying attention to some of the issues that bar people or keep people from accessing opportunity. Dr. King talked about this in 1968. You knew I was going to have to talk about Dr. King somewhere. He, in his I Have a Dream speech, there's some things that he said that are not as widely quoted as the I Have a Dream speech, but he talked about the great vaults of opportunity in our country, the great vaults of opportunity. And those of us in this room have some reason to know of those vaults of opportunity. Not all of us grew up rich. Not all of us grew up with the best education or with the greatest opportunity in the world for all kinds of reasons. And yet here we are today. We've been able to reach out and access opportunity. I meet people like you all over the country. And yet for many people in our Commonwealth and across our country, the access to opportunity that promise has not yet been met, has not yet been fulfilled. I am someone who says, in general, that every community, every town, every county, every small country town is only as strong as its weakest link. Louisville is only as strong as its weakest link. Lexington, only as strong as its weakest link. Hoptown, only as strong as its weakest link. Right? Somerset, all of those communities. And so the question is, what is it that we need to be about in terms of providing access to opportunity on a higher level? And why should we be doing this anyway? So I come to you motivated by the consideration of the Fair Housing Act, and a part of the Fair Housing Act that says that it's an obligation of HUD, the Secretary of HUD, okay, Julian Castro at the moment, and a very wonderful guy he is, too, I will tell you, who is leading us to say that for the fair housing purposes, where we're supposed to be going is a more integrated communities, more integrated communities. This comes back again from 1968. What is that all about? What does it mean? Well, this obligation about affirmatively furthering fair housing says what we're supposed to be about is addressing access to opportunity in many ways, in many time frames, in many venues, and at many dimensions. It's not one dimension. And it's not just about today, it's something is discriminatory, and HUD comes out and does an investigation of some complaint and people get annoyed by the whole thing. It's much bigger than that. It's about undoing the legacies of 100 years or more of discrimination and segregation, inequality, and lack of opportunity. So in case you thought I was just going to come and give you a few kind words and wave goodbye, I'm actually presenting you with a rather significant challenge. So we are at HUD addressing the obligation to affirmatively further fair housing in multiple ways, and I'll talk to you about some of those in a few minutes. But I want to start by talking about some of the legacies of discrimination that still exist in your state and in states all across the country. I know this state, and I know the legacies exist here. I know other states. I'll give you state of Delaware, state of New Jersey, places where I have reason to have delved deeply into the community, and to tell you that these barriers to opportunity, these long-standing legacies of discrimination and separation and divisiveness still exist. So what's that legacy look like? Where did it come from? I'm sure you know some of these things. You've heard about them, you've thought about them, perhaps or perhaps not. So segregation by race or by national origin, by neighborhood or by site. And I can say that and you go, oh yeah, okay, next. But that's not where I want you to go. I want you to think about your own community, the community in which you live or work or spend time. And I want to ask you this. Think about a neighborhood that is segregated by race, this is Kentucky, and that's poor. What is the race of the people who live in that community? Just don't say it out loud, just think. Now I want you to think about what there is in that neighborhood or that area of town or that small rural community that is opportunity for the people who live in that particular neighborhood. Do they have access to fresh food? Jobs? Health care? You know, and I know the answer. In many communities across our state, there are still people who are set off by racial segregation and who live in communities that don't have access to those things. And we're addressing that. And we're addressing that at HUD in multiple ways right now, some of which is the investment of resources in those communities. Talk about that in a second as well. We're still overcoming the patterns of racially restrictive covenants in our country that became part of deeds all over the country that said if you were Catholic, Jewish, or black, you couldn't live in this neighborhood. Those covenants haven't been enforceable since 1948, but they still show up. And I've still seen them waved in people's faces as being a barrier to an individual with resources trying to buy a lot or a house in a neighborhood that's racially restrictive. Sundown towns. How many of you know about sundown towns? Sundown towns, you're not admitting it if you know. Sundown towns are towns across this country, and not just in the South and not just in Kentucky, in which African Americans were not welcome after sundown. They could come to town to shop or to work, to clean house, do maintenance, cook, but they're supposed to live someplace else. There is a list. There's information online, a whole book written about this, and there's a list online. I looked at it this morning. There are over 20 towns in the state of Kentucky alone that the author identifies as potential sundown towns. I once spent some time in a sundown town, Vidor, Texas, which had no African-American residents still in 1994, in a part of the state where African-Americans were quite prevalent, except in Vidor. Vidor had a reputation as a sundown town. When the first African-American moved into the Public Housing Authority in Vidor, he was mercilessly harassed. The KKK came through with their truck and made loud noises and carried shotguns. Other residents who were white got out in their yards and shook their shotguns at the general world and said, if that N-word comes on my property, it's a Public Housing Authority. Okay, her property, whatever. They're gonna get hurt. The opposition, the race-based opposition to this first African-American resident in Vidor was astonishing. HUD took over that housing authority, and I spent over a week there myself personally trying to get things stabilized in terms of fighting back against the race-based hatred that was so prevalent in that community. Sadly, the first African-American resident of Vidor, Texas, was shot dead by someone who was never identified on the streets of Vidor after sundown. Do we still have racial divisiveness in our country today? Well, I think you know that we do. But in some communities, that racial divide is still there. It still exists. It's been the custom, the pattern, the way things are for a long, long time. It takes attention. It takes thought. It takes resources, whether it's local resources, a local bank, a local community leader, a local church, a local CDBG entitlement jurisdiction, a local state agency, to think about how to invest resources in that community to start removing the inequity that has been so historically part of that community for so long. Sundown towns do still exist. I see them in my work all the time. When I was in Louisville, one of the things that I litigated about was a racially segregated cemetery in Lebanon, Kentucky. The work that I did taught me that we still have those divisions here. Some of the other historic patterns were federally government, came from the federal government, not from local government. Federal Housing Administration, the FHA, you know them, they would do loans all over the place for all kinds of things. Their predecessor redlined community after community and said loans could not be made available in black neighborhood. We had urban redevelopment that resulted in the destruction of neighborhoods that had come up over years and that created new pockets of segregation. Highway development sometimes cut off communities, and if you look around some of the bigger cities, you can see where the roads are, and that it isolates or further isolates communities of color, keeps them from growing, keeps them from expanding, and also just help destroy neighborhoods. We still have zoning that unintentionally, I'm sure, keeps out multifamily housing, zoning variance processes that limit affordable housing developers and getting approvals in local communities because they don't want that kind of housing or those kinds of people in the community. We have cases like that pending all over the country today. We had federal government mandated segregation of public housing for many years, and still those patterns exist in public housing, where we have segregation by site within public housing. We have the black site and the white site. Department of Justice is suing one such housing authority right now for still having racial segregation in that housing authority. And my staff, in a little town called Cairo, Illinois, you know where that is? Right across the river from Paducah? Okay, that's fine. Amen, sister, but they have racially segregated public housing there. And my staff's taking it on. And you're going amen, aren't you? All right. So, and it still exists today. we're going to do something about it in Cairo. My folks are threatening to withhold money from the Alexandria Housing Authority unless they desegregate today. And I believe they're going to do it. I have some stubborn folks down in there. And we still have community opposition. Anybody here develop affordable housing? Ever seen community opposition? Any of you working for this agency? Community opposition to affordable housing? There's a general NIMBYism campaign, and that often deteriorates into name-calling, racist and otherwise discriminatory opposition. Oh, no, we don't want families living here. Think about the burden on the schools. Or let's not have another ghetto out here. Or all these people with disabilities, they're going to generate hazardous waste and things, right? Okay? Those behaviors still exist. Any affordable housing developer that's done a lot of work has heard it at least once. I've heard so many stories I've given up counting them. There was a developer who said he was told by a planner in a community not very far from here that said, no, we don't want any more affordable housing there because we don't want any more Mexicans in our community. Okay, let's be flat out and open about our preferences. So the language barriers, the whole set of issues having to do with new immigrants into our communities, how they get absorbed, where they get housed, how they get housed, and does the housing for them perpetuate segregation in some way? Or do they have the range of choices in the community? And what about language barriers? My staff took on the state of New Jersey after Superstorm Sandy hit. Right? And there were so many civil rights issues. We drew a major complaint. And one of the first issues that we addressed was the fact in the wake of Sandy, the 11 counties impacted by Sandy were the most segregated in the state by race and by national origin. And there were 11 different languages besides English that were predominantly spoken by people who really didn't understand English. Lots of pockets of immigrant communities. And these were the people most affected by the storm. And their information about their recovery, the money, that they could get to help rebuild or to relocate or Section 8 subsidies being offered for temporary housing, they couldn't find out about any of that because the information wasn't available in their language. That's what started our investigation, but it grew much broader than that. We ended up settling with the state of New Jersey an agreement and entering into an agreement last May that called for the investment of $240 million worth of Sandy disaster recovery money in non-segregated communities for affordable housing. And the developers up there are developing housing left and right, consistent with the agreement. And my staff continues to check, but it does in fact appear that every program that the state is operating that provides resources both to individuals, to small businesses, to owners of manufactured housing, and even to developers and small businesses are being offered in each one of the 11 languages that they're supposed to be offering it to, so that the program is actually getting to the people it's meant to serve. So these kinds of barriers exist out there, and they're not, necessarily created by people full of hate. I don't mean to tell you that. They're sometimes created by just a lack of attention to the real questions of what needs to be done in a community to increase access to opportunity. So when we talk about creating access to opportunity in a community of color, what would you say we think about? So think of that neighborhood that's segregated and poor. What forms of, and think about it in your own community, the place you know. It might be a few small blocks or it might be a huge swath of community. Think about opportunity. What is opportunity? Opportunity is access to jobs, access to health care, access to better than average schools, access to fresh food, access to drugstores. Actually, opportunity is everything that any of us in this room would like to have access to from where we live. Without giving the whole rap about how important it is where we live, think about it. So I'm the mother, a single mother, of a daughter who used to be a teenager not very long ago, and I thought about often, what was the opportunity that I needed? First of all, I did live through it. Okay, I just want to tell you all, those of you who doubt that you'll ever live through the teenagedom of your kids, you do live through it. Battered but unbeaten. But what's opportunity for a single mom with a teenager? What is opportunity? Okay? Well, first of all, safe, crime-free, well-lit, so if the kid's coming home after dark on one of those early afternoons where it's already gotten dark, there's street lights. Walking distance to schools, mostly, for the care and feeding of the parents as well as care and feeding of the kid, right? Access to a drugstore or a small grocery store or even a big grocery store so they can get over there and get the carton of milk when you text them. We don't have any milk for breakfast tomorrow and I'm at a meeting, get us the milk, so they can go there safely. You know, I see people nodding in recognition, okay? For older teenagers, someplace they can get an after-school job, right? What else? Transportation, jobs, healthcare. Am I missing some of the big elements? Okay. Now think about the people who live in those segregated and poor parts of our community, the single moms with the teenage kids. They got that? I'm saying mostly not. I have a slide set. I didn't bring slides. Said you're just going to have to do with what I'm saying from my head and my heart today. Forget the slides. But I have slides that show communities where the disparity in opportunity includes, here's these neighborhoods that are segregated and there's not a street light in sight, and here's the white areas and there are a million street lights. I got a map that shows that for a town in our country. Because there's the street lights in the communities, the poor communities aren't working or were never there. And so the roads aren't safe. And I'm not even talking about the other forms of infrastructure that often do not exist in these parts of our community. Can I say paved roads? One of the first civil rights cases I did as a practicing lawyer in this area was deal with a somewhat rural county where they paved the road through the white neighborhood and past the white church, and then they stopped paving it right when it reached the edge of the black community down to the black church. There's no pavement, no anything, gravel, rutted road to get to that part of the community. I know that those distinctions continue to exist out there in some of our more rural communities. So the inequities include infrastructure, paved streets, working sidewalks, absence of potholes, availability of trash pickup on a routine basis, all kinds of infrastructure issues, including access to water. Did you ever hear about the case of Zanesville, Ohio? Yeah, some of you have, some haven't. So that water treatment plant served the community, right? They spent a lot of money on it. Zanesville is, I think it's a sub-recipient of CDBG money. Maybe they even used some CDBG money to build this water treatment plant. The water treatment plant was up here, and it served the white community kind of like this and some down here. But right here in the middle of the donut, close to the water treatment plant, was the black community called Coal Run, who had no public water access. None. Everyone around them had public water. This community did not. They were still getting their water from wells or from rain barrels. So that's the kind of inequity that sometimes remains embedded in our communities. And if you start talking to each other, people who've grown up in smaller parts of the state and have come to the big city know about some of these stories. I look around, I see people nodding. I know that this is part of the Kentucky legacy. So we try to think about bringing opportunity to communities of color. No grocery stores, no drugstores, no banking services. Can I say that for those of you who've heard millions of speeches about payday lending, the reason why we have the growth of the payday lending is because we do not have conventional banking services. So my view of that is, first we fight the food desert fight and try to get a grocery store that's a real grocery store that doesn't just sell Twinkies and beer, you know, right? In those areas, and then we put a branch bank in that grocery store, and then we put a drugstore down the road, or we put some other things that creates a there, and not a strip mall that includes payday lenders and, you know, and household finance and, you know, all these other sort of organizations that don't necessarily do a service to that community. Creating even a block of investment like that in a community of color or opening up access in some other way can make a really strong difference in that neighborhood starting to turn around. And if you can tie it to affordable housing options, whether it's through the HUD's RAD program that is investing in new renovations and investing strongly in public housing units to replace them, either on the existing site or in other sites. And in many communities, investing in existing housing means perpetuation of segregation. So my office's job is to make sure that that opportunity is created through the investment of RAD money. But for the first time in a long time, we have hard units being constructed. And it's a really great step forward. Chris here can tell you all about it if you want to know more about that. But beyond that, the more access to opportunity includes, really picking a neighborhood and investing in it. I've seen so many success stories where you start with market rate housing or a grocery store or mixed income kind of housing and mixed use housing as a sort of a anchor for redevelopment around it. Combine it with some other initiatives, whether it's home investment for home ownership or single-family home ownership, or it's household loans to help keep up the housing that's already there, to build up what you have while creating, an improved environment and correspondingly providing options outside in other areas. Another way of creating opportunities is to use your Section 8 program to expand housing opportunity across the community by trying to tell HUD that it should raise the FMR rate. You and my boss is listening. To be able to help incentivize landlords to participate in Section 8 landlords in areas that are not the same old neighborhoods and the same old cruddy housing. So there are big patterns going on. There is support for and encouragement for, both from a civil rights point of view and from a policy point of view at HUD, to create affordable housing options in areas that already have opportunity. And you know what the opportunity neighborhoods are. Some of you maybe already live in them. They're the place in the burbs. They might be pretty white, the new high school, the new hospital, the new Target. Right? The place where you can get that. My kid can walk to school, my kid can get to the grocery store and get the thing of milk. There is some infrastructure there already. There are costs associated with the development of affordable housing in those more suburban areas or near urban areas, but governments can support or incentivize some developments there by helping them think about paving roads, extending the sewer lines or the public water, if that's needed to incentivize the development of affordable housing outside of traditional neighborhoods. Because the truth is, people live in all parts of our community who need affordable housing. People live in all parts of our community who need access to opportunity. And unless we consider both the investment in the communities of color and the creation of alternatives in areas outside of those neighborhoods, our community will still be kind of limping along like this, It won't be a balanced approach. I do need to speak a little bit about people with disabilities and their access to housing in a fair housing and civil rights context. For most of you, there's this general overlay from the Department of Justice and the Olmstead decision and getting people out of institutions. I'm going to tell you that I think there are three critical components to support housing for people with disabilities. One is, when you're doing new housing, you have to comply with the law for accessibility, and that includes not the ADA, the Fair Housing Act, right, and Section 504. So if you get federal financial assistance, Section 504 means creation of units that are fully accessible to people with disabilities. And the Fair Housing Act means creating a large number of units, potentially in new construction, that are usable by people with disabilities. Ignore those laws at your peril. We are taking on these cases left and right for enforcement purposes. Those of you who do code enforcement, those of you who do local community leadership, make sure that the folks getting permits to build affordable or market rate housing know about these laws and comply with them. That's creating a range of housing choices in new construction. That's really important. The RAD program is going to be supporting, as you renovate existing housing or construct new housing through the RAD program, fully accessible housing choices. But it's not so much the housing for people with disabilities over here or the housing for people with disabilities with the seniors over here. So I just sidebar on this. I spent the first year after my marriage living with my husband, who used a wheelchair and was a planner, an urban planner. Eventually was a community planner in Louisville before his death. We went to their first year of marriage. We lived in a senior housing because it's the only place we could find an accessible unit. It was not that much fun, I'm going to tell you straight up. Right? So, I mean, we were the youngest people in that place by a factor of 40 years or more, honestly. So, creating a range of housing choices for people with disabilities. We are moving away from, the personal care home, and there used to be one in Louisville that had 240 units, and it was all people with mental disabilities, and they all hung out on the street corner smoking cigarettes. There were no programs, there were all no activities. It was just like, it was a personal care home, but what it was like was a mini institution. The Department of Justice are shutting those down across the country and saying we need to provide neighborhood-based integrated housing options for people with disabilities too, so that people with disabilities can have the same kind of access to opportunity that the rest of us have. And so there are lawsuits, enforcement activities, things going on around that, but the planners are paying attention to this, I hope, and supporting it in Kentucky, where you're talking about people leaving institutions or people who are at risk of institutionalization and needing normalized housing first kind of opportunities, including homeless people. The support for those initiatives needs to continue. And we are moving away from the model that says, let's just put all the people with disabilities over here and kind of shut the doors. It's recognition that people with disabilities, like the rest of us, do best in a community setting, in a neighborhood setting, with access to opportunity. I do argue that access to opportunity for people with disabilities may be a little different than access to opportunity for families with kids. So if you've got a kid, schools really factor into things. If you've a person, and so either improving the schools by adding a magnet school or creating housing options where the schools are already there and good is one approach. But for people with disabilities, it's often not about, it's often, not always, but often not about access to schools as sort of a primary driver, but it may be access to accessible transportation, to social services, even to the Social Security office or health care access. That needs to be thought about when you're citing affordable housing. Tax credit developers, I love the stories of tax credit developers that I've seen that have contracts with mental health care providers and others to have a contract to provide a few units in a tax credit property for referrals from those agencies, from those health care agencies. So it doesn't become a site that's just for people with disabilities. It becomes a site that is for everybody, including some people with disabilities. So what do we do? How do we get to the access of opportunity story? Well, my job actually, as Chris said in the introduction, is I do the enforcement side of things. And I want to tell you that on the civil rights enforcement point of view, we are actively engaged in taking on these issues around the country. Whether it's Dubuque, Iowa, which used a residency preference, which they were legally entitled to use, but they used it in a way that basically shut the door. In a white community, it just circled around that white community and said, you get a preference, so big a preference if you live here, that nobody from the outside could come in. And the people trying to come in from the outside with their Section 8 vouchers were mostly people of color. So their use of their residency preference was too strong, and it created essentially a bar at the barriers. We took on, that was the one where we issued a letter of findings against Dubuque, and the next day the mayor got in the paper and apologized because he said we had no idea, we didn't know what we were doing. I'm not saying this is intentional stuff. I'm saying re-examine from the roots some of the underlying assumptions that you haven't thought about for a long time. We've taken on a siting of affordable housing and rental housing in Sussex County, Delaware, and Galveston, Texas, in Houston, Texas, and most currently in Beaumont, Texas. Beaumont's, 30 miles or less away from Vidor, and it has its continuing civil rights problems. We're taking on civil rights issues also against lenders. So some of you have heard, perhaps, of my current favorite in our long list of interesting civil rights cases. The lenders who would not close on a loan when they found out that the borrower or the co-borrower was pregnant. That's sex discrimination. And what happened was the lenders would say to the woman or to the borrower, whoever it was, you know what, we can't close on this loan until she goes back to work. Now, here's the pattern that I recognize, because I did this too. So when I was pregnant, all of those hormones kick in, and you're in a nesting mode if you're the woman. And you want a cool new place, if you can possibly find one, where you can like have a great nursery and put in the wallpaper and have the new crib. Nesting instincts, it's absolutely what happens. I went and moved someplace new when I was 7 months pregnant. I must have been crazy, but it was the hormones making me do it. All right? It's a known pattern. Oh my gosh, we're pregnant, we got to buy a new house. I'm telling you. And so what would happen was the women would be, by the time they found the house and were dealing with the lender, they would be, either perhaps sometimes already on maternity leave or short-term disability leave or planning to be on leave in the near future. And the lenders over and over again would say, well, we can't close on the list loan until you go back to work, i.e. after the child is born. The families hated that. They wanted to be in there when the baby was born so they didn't have to be moving with an infant. Of course they did. We've had cases against Wells Fargo, Bank of America, some of our favorite lenders, SunTrust, actually 46 lenders over this kind of problem. And people were often told that just this calm assumption that the women wouldn't be going back to work. And I don't know about you, but I don't know too many people who have the luxury of having a kid and staying home for the rest of their natural lives. Sometimes they do, but not very often. And the truth is, people do go back to work and they have no loss of income, or they have money in reserves that they can devote to being sure they can afford the loan, because they're going to stay home, but it's only because they got money in the bank letting them do that, right? And the lenders weren't asking about any of that. We have a major case against Wells Fargo that we settled last year, sort of an after effect of the predatory lending crisis, in which it was alleged, and I have to say alleged, there's no finding, that Wells Fargo was failing to maintain foreclosed houses in communities of color, as well as it was maintaining foreclosed houses in white neighborhoods, and that amounted to illegal discrimination and also deterioration of the neighborhood, because of course, and deterioration and burden on the communities who are now having to pay for code enforcement, having to pay for rat and rodent control, weed control, all of these things, because the allegation was that Wells Fargo was not maintaining its real estate-owned properties, the foreclosed properties in its inventory, consistently with what it was doing in the white neighborhoods. That case resulted in a settlement between the National Fair Housing Alliance and HUD. HUD had a complaint in that matter. And Wells Fargo, that I will tell you, Wells Fargo has spent $42 million in investment in communities of color around the country. And I've seen the picture, I've seen the investment, the improvement in the neighborhoods. It's taught me that the role that private industry can play in partnership. Now, granted, Wells Fargo got brought to this table through a conciliation agreement, oops. But private industry can play a role in investment in communities to build up offices or to support economic development or to even create the demand for affordable housing in those communities. As the mayor of Schenectady, New York, I was up there not so long ago. General Electric, which was originated in Schenectady, New York, has invested in a poor minority part of the community for redevelopment because it's to their advantage to do so. And that community and the whole downtown area is now showing a prosperity and growth that it was lacking even 5 years ago. So don't forget that those of you in this room have partners in the private industry, whether it's banks, because there's no investment of banks in these parts of our community, whether it's private business, whether it's a distillery, I have to mention distilleries, or a tobacco company, or whoever it is, right, in your community that is sort of the mainstay of the community for jobs. There are opportunities to be built there, opportunities to be built with schools, opportunities to be built faith-based community. The point that I want to end up with you is the recognition, as our state's First Lady said, that we are all in this together, that it is on our shoulders to make our communities work better. It is on the shoulders of the people in this room to make sure that the investments that are made, the money that is spent at a time where we don't have as much money as we might have had in the past, that the actions that we take are towards strengthening our community and making sure that there is equitable opportunity for everyone who lives in our communities. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. If that presentation wasn't enough and you still want to talk to me, I'm going to be around here until lunchtime. If any of you would like to talk to me individually about challenges, issues, head scratching, I'm not sure what to do. One of the advantages that I try to bring to my work when I give these presentations is to share with one community what's going on in other communities. And speaking of that, I do want to say that without a doubt, my ability and the opportunity that's been given to me to make presentations of awards here this morning has taught me something very important, and that is Kentucky is full of best practices. And the awards that I'm going to offer symbolize the best of civil rights work, the best of fair housing activities across the country, not just here in Kentucky. I'm proud to be able to do that. So of the awards that I've been asked to present, the first goes to the Louisville Metro Human Relations Commission. Under the administration of Mayor Greg Fisher, this commission saw that Louisville had sort of stopped, was not making progress in addressing concentrations of people in protected classes. That is to say, that there needed to be some more work done on segregation. I'll just call it like it was. And it was clear, as it is clear in every community across this country, for change to occur, it takes local folks working locally, maybe offering some direction being given from, sort of the national picture. It takes local folks working locally and political leadership as well as staff leadership to make change. The Human Relations Commission in Louisville applied to my office for funding, and we at HUD were happy to support them in giving them a grant to tell the story of housing segregation in Louisville and to create the report called Making Louisville Home for Us All, a 20-year action plan for fair housing. This is indisputably a national best practice. I tell you straight up. I have told so many people about this. I've studied it. I've read it. I was introduced to it last fall. I have told so many people who come out around the country of this is the thing that Mayor Fisher's leadership, the Human Relations Commission's leadership has taken, is just truly an exemplar. The plan is divided into two parts. The first part recognizes the role of local government as being a witness to the commitment to fair housing. And not just having a fair housing officer, someone over here in a marginalized space with no budget, believe me, I know about this, doing fair housing work. It was the recognition that all departments of the city have an obligation to participate in and a role to play in advancing fair housing. And I know this exists, don't I? Because when I was in Louisville last fall, I came to a meeting, and every department of the city of Louisville that was involved in this play, and it was a big old table and everybody was sitting around it, was there to talk to me about what their role was in affirmatively furthering fair housing and protecting fair housing rights. I was so impressed. Nobody else is doing this, y'all. Nobody else. The second section of the work that the Commission is doing recognizes the need for community engagement. And there is currently under construction a campaign to show that fair housing benefits everyone in the community. That fair housing, if implemented correctly, strengthens the entire community, something I obviously believe in and support based on what I said to you this morning, for example. So please help me congratulate the Louisville Metro Human Relations Commission in awarding them this.
Thank you. I'm Carolyn Miller-Cooper. I'm the director of the Human Relations Commission. Wow, I'm not usually nervous. Okay, it is my pleasure to receive this award on behalf of Metro Government and the Human Relations Commission. And I want to acknowledge HUD funding this, Metropolitan Housing Coalition and the Ann Braden Institute doing the research and the writing. Everyone played their part. Now, unfortunately, Mayor Fisher was unable to join us here today, but he is very excited about this. Having a home is crucial to everyone's sense of well-being. And I'm going to get off script here and just take a second to tell you how this came about. I was sitting at the school board meeting one night, and we were debating busing. And this gentleman who relocated to Louisville from North Carolina said, quote, "I worked hard to move to the neighborhood I'm in. And if those people would work hard, they could live in the same neighborhood that I'm living in." And I thought about that. Do the people working in McDonald's not work as hard as some of us? So fast forward, the 50th anniversary of the commission was coming up. And we were sitting in the office trying to figure out, well, how are we going to celebrate? And I went home that night and I thought about it and I said, you know, the 50th anniversary is a celebration. However, we need to leave the community a legacy. We need to do something that will push us forward. And what's the number one issue? Housing. It impacts everything. And hence, I thought about that gentleman's comments and I thought, you know what? He does not understand the history. He doesn't understand why people are living where they're living. How many other people in the community do not? And then looking at the future. Do we just look and say, hey, things are the way they are, oh well? No, we have to have a plan and we need to move forward. And in closing, I'd like to challenge everyone here to go back to your community, look at the history, and look at what you have in front of you today, and look at what could be. Get a plan together and get moving. Thank you.
Thank you, and those remarks, I think, are quite profound and important. You know, you guys in this room are community leaders in your own right, and you too can have a brainstorm about what it takes. I do tell people, find your issue. Find the issue that resonates with you or with your community and focus on one issue. Don't just try to take on everything at once because it'll kill you, right? Focus on one issue, whether it's making more affordable housing options available in communities parts of the community where there is opportunity, or whether it's bringing opportunity to a community of color. You know, I think those two things are a nice balance. I think they eventually both have to occur for the community to be strong. But there are only so many people you can do. Identify your issue, which is what you did. Take on the project. Do it well. Bring your allies in, right? Celebrate your successes. And I'm happy to be part of the celebration of the success of this activity myself today. So our second award, we want to recognize an attorney who's not only got a great grasp of the law, and I know this because I'm talking to him about legal issues all the time, but who also understands people and personalities and important dynamics. The Lexington Fair Housing Council, which employs Art Crosby, is another activity that my office funds through a grant program called the Fair Housing Initiatives Program. Art has been both a steady presence and a passionate advocate, and I can tell you it's hard to do both of those things simultaneously. He is recognized nationally for his work on fair housing, whether that issue is zoning or homeless shelter opportunities in the city of Lexington, domestic violence shelters and their access to opportunity, or fair housing as it is dealt with at multiple layers and in multiple ways throughout the community and the area that he serves. Art's always been there, and he's been there as a strong and effective advocate, but representing individuals who did not necessarily have someone else to advocate for them. He makes sure that civil rights are not really just something you talk about once a year, and they're not really aspirational, but they mean something, and they mean something in real people's lives. Art's been one of Kentucky's greatest and quietest threats to injustice. Art's not a boastful person, and I know this, but he's not exactly someone who's out there tooting his own horn. But the work that he has done, the body of work that he has accomplished already speaks for him. And today we want to recognize Art for the work that he's doing, the very effective job that he has been doing, and express to him our profound hope that he'll continue doing it. Ladies and gentlemen, Art Crosby.
Thank you. This is both a surprise and humbling. I would like to just focus. When we go to the conferences, when we talk about awards, we often talk about big things, aspirational things, but a lot of it just really does begin in just that personal interactions, those small things, the small things that we all do. People who are housing providers here, right, that single mom with 3 kids who you're able to find someplace for, that individual with a disability who calls you and you have to stay on the phone for 30 minutes talking them through the problem, but you take the time to do it, that's the real success and the real victory, and I think that's the thing we need to really measure our successes by. Thank you.
Where do we go from here? Can I give people a break? Okay.
Kathy, I have a few minutes to speak. Just want to make sure I had a couple of minutes. Make sure you weren't going to play music on me like we're at the Grammys. Politely asked me to exit left. I wanted to make a quick announcement. Being that it's Fair Housing Month, the department has a new tool out there to give folks more information on fair housing. The department just released an app, both on Apple phones and on Android, that you can download now to get more information on fair housing. So if you have your phones, it'd be great if you do that right now. The second thing, I wanted to do a couple of presentations and really touch on a topic that really hits home with me that Ms. Pratt brought up. And really that's about the negative stigmatism that's brought about on affordable housing. As I've traveled across the state, speaking with many of you told me about either you having problems with building affordable housing or receiving complaints about the affordable housing that you have out there. One of the things that we'd like to do here in the Kentucky field office is really change the perception, change the way people think of affordable housing. We think that'll really help you guys in terms of maintaining your units and to build new additional units. One of the goals that I've set for our office is once a month to get one story out there to the media and other social outlets on positive images on folks who are in affordable housing, especially because a lot of the stories that I hear when there are problems in affordable housing, a lot of times it's not really the residents that live there. It's folks outside of those communities. So today I brought 3 individuals who I'd like to highlight, who I see as affordable housing today. The first individual asked to step up, Ms. Monica Ross. And I want to thank Ms. Lacey from the Lexington Housing Authority to getting her here today. Ms. Ross is formerly a resident of the Lexington Housing Authority, is now a proud homeowner since her participation in the public housing FSS program. That's the Family Self-Sufficiency Program. Ms. Ross' actual date of participation began on May 2nd in 2011, and she continued in the program until she purchased her home with her FSS supportive service counselor on January 30th in 2014. Ms. Ross is a single mother who is now gainfully employed, and her next goal is to start her own business. We are sure she has the skills to do so and to succeed in whatever her endeavors do. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Ms. Monica Ross. Second, I'd like to present Mr. Brent Baker. Mr. Baker was in the U.S. Navy 40 years ago and was discharged a year later with PTSD due to an incident that happened during his service. He spiraled downhill for 35 years and was depressed, which led to alcoholism and drug abuse. He eventually found himself alone and homeless. He found someone with VA who connected him with Interlink, which began his road to recovery. He eventually found the HUD-VASH program and now has a place to call home. He received his bachelor's in social work and started looking for permanent employment. He was very fortunate to run into someone with Volunteers of America at a job fair where he found employment. The Volunteers of America has allowed him the chance to help homeless veteran population, which is one of his passions. He's now working on finding a college that will work around his schedule at Volunteers of America to continue his education and receive his master's. He's studying for a CDAC license in order to broaden his knowledge, and he wants to help more veterans and anyone else he can along the way. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Brent Baker. The last individual I'm going to ask her to come up and tell her own story. It's Miss Myra Woodard from the Louisville area, who is glad she was able to come down here today.
Hello, everyone. My name is Myra Woodard, and I am a former resident of the Clarksdale housing. And I am nervous and unprepared for this, but I was asked to share a fraction of my journey. And but first and foremost, I'd like to thank you all for allowing me to be a recipient of this award. Prior to me becoming a Clarksdale resident, I also was a resident at Wayside Christian Mission Homeless Shelter, and I also was a resident at the Salvation Army and Women's for Family and Children. After moving into Clarksdale residence, but before that, I had always said to myself, I said, I would never, ever, never, ever live in public housing. And that was because of the perspective that I've had. Growing up as a child, I've witnessed abuse, I've witnessed murder, I've witnessed violence, and I just didn't want any more of that. And so after living into Clarksdale housing for a while, I was diagnosed with an illness, which forced me to go on disability for a while, and I had to take a series of treatments. And then I was informed of the Hope 6, and I would have to move. And I said to myself, fear kicked in, and where was I going to go? One more thing. And I thought moving into public housing was the worst thing that ever happened to me, but I found out and learned that that was the best thing that had happened to me. Once the Hope 6 came about, and I have to just say it like it is, they said they was going to send case managers to my house, and I didn't want these people coming in my house, meddling in my business, and that's just how I felt. But I'm telling you, the torch that was passed through each individual of love, compassion, understanding, empowerment, respect, and dignity changed my life. So I say that to say that the work through you people helped change my family. They sent case managers to my house, and we would set these goals, and I had goals, and I had dreams. But because of my past childhood, I was unable to accomplish those things. I was missed out on a lot of opportunities. So the case manager would come to my house, and I said I wanted to go to college. Although I had a high school diploma, and being out of school for a while, I tested on a 5th grade level, and no one would financially assist me. And I said to myself, I would no longer allow anyone to determine my destination. And I went on anyway. And I pushed and pushed. It was hard. It was a bumpy road for me. But I went on and graduated with honors from JCC with a double degree. Then I transferred to Spalding and obtained my undergrad. And in a couple of weeks, I'll be graduating from U of L with my master's. And so, and not only that, I currently work with homeless women addicted to drugs and alcohol. Prior to that, I've worked with pregnant women addicted to drugs and alcohol and are HIV positive. My goal is to continue to work with this population. I would like to open my own facility for women addicted to drugs and alcohol and HIV positive. And in the honor of my brother who was killed by a drunken driver in 2006, it would be called Charlie's Angels. So that would be my next goal. But one thing that I do, I work with women just like me. And I always said to myself, God, if you ever gave me the opportunity, that's all I needed. I'm sorry, but that's all I needed was an opportunity to be on the other side. And then I have the opportunity to work with women just like me. So the women that I work with is deal with issues of domestic violence, sexual abuse, trauma, mental illness, and drug and alcohols. And I love my job. It's not much money, but I lead spiritual benefits that are just unseen on a daily basis. So as I go to work on a daily basis, because of you people and what you do on a daily basis and work with individuals and families, if we could continue to make changes in one individual, we are able to make changes in families. If we are able to change families, we are able to change communities. And if we change communities, we are able to change the world. And thank you very much.
There's not much more for me to say. I think it's all been said, but I thank you all for being here, and we thank especially our guests. We thank Chris for coming and also for Sara Pratt for coming, and she is going to remain, so for those of you who would like to have some other conversations with Sara and seek some advice, as we have done on numerous occasions, and appreciate her assistance. We thank Monica, Brent, and Myra for coming today and for telling us why we do what we do and the importance of that. We appreciate you very much. And to the Metro Human Rights Commission, we thank you for your work, and Art Crosby as well. Have a nice morning, the rest of the morning, and we'll see you at lunchtime. Thank you.